Okay, I think we should just get started. We've waited about as long as I can justify for people to come in, but I think given that it's a morning session, people will probably keep streaming in for some time. So welcome to this panel. This is one of the Left Forum's panels on foreign policy, the theme of which is continuities in American foreign policy from Bush II to Obama. I'm Vivek Chibber. I teach sociology at New York University, and I'm also on the board of directors of the Left Forum. To my left, at the end, is Stephen Shalom. Professor Shalom teaches political science at William Paterson University, and he also works with ZNet, which I gather most of you should be familiar with. It's one of the most visited and most important sites for left analysis on the internet, and with Z Magazine, and also with the journal New Politics. Professor Shalom has written very widely on U.S. foreign policy, in the Philippines, the U.S. colonial occupation and colonial rule in the Philippines, and most importantly, in recent years, the Middle East, especially Israel. To his right is Professor Michael Schwartz. Michael is a professor of sociology at Stony Brook University, and he's the author of the very important book, which is here, and if people are interested in purchasing it after the talk, please feel free. Michael might even sign a few of them for you. This is War Without End, the Iraq War in Context, which is one of the very best analyses of the American occupation of Iraq, and also the important phenomenon of the Iraqi resistance. We were supposed to have a third panelist, Nir Rosen, who's a freelance journalist working on Afghanistan. He unfortunately had to pull out. He's on assignment somewhere. He would not tell me where. I assume it's undercover somewhere. But as a result, he couldn't make it today. So it'll just be the three of us. One, I suppose, positive development in this is we'll have more time for questions and discussion afterwards. And if the crowd remains a small one, it'll be an intimate discussion. So we can get started now. And the way we'll proceed is I will say a few words about the general theme. And then we will go to, I think, Stephen first, and then Michael will conclude. So on the issue of continuities, I suppose with every presidential administration in American history, you could have had a panel on foreign policy called Continuities in Foreign Policy. And the basic reason is that continuities are the norm in American foreign policy. The commitment to strategic expansion of American interests, and the use of force, the use of aggression, the general disregard for international law, the insistence on prioritizing American strategic objectives over human rights, over norms of cosmopolitanism, that's been true of the American state almost from its inception. And tracing one administration after the other, what stands out is each administration's preservation of whatever imperial gains were made by its predecessor. In that respect, insofar as there has been a continuity of imperial commitments on Obama's part, it really shouldn't be much of a surprise. What we have to attend to is the specifics of Obama, the details of how he's gone about building on Bush's gains for the American imperial project, and the extent to which countervailing forces have been more or less successful in their fights against these gains. Now, if we turn to this issue of the specifics, the interesting fact about Bush is that there were two administrations, of course, of the second Bush, and those two were not the same on matters of foreign policy. In his first administration, from 2000 to 2004, that tends to stand out in popular memory as kind of an aberration, as kind of something that stepped outside the norms of American foreign policy. Not in the fact that it was overtly imperial and overtly aggressive. That is not something that's peculiar to Bush. What stands out, apparently, is in the degree of its aggressiveness and the fact that it ditched certain well-known nostrums of policy objectives and policy pursuits. The main one which people point to is the abandonment of multilateralism and the resort to unilateralism. And the fact that Bush seemed to be totally oblivious to, and in fact contemptuous, of domestic public opinion. Now, some of this is, I think, correct, but historical memory tends to be short on these matters, and myth-making proceeds a little bit faster than it ought to. Because the salient historical fact about the first Bush administration is that while it did depart in some important ways from the norms of American foreign policy, the departure wasn't quite as severe as people think. So, first of all, with regard to the Bush's position in relation to the rest of the American elite, it's important to keep in mind that the most aggressive and the most conspicuous acts on Bush's part were largely a bipartisan affair. This stands out nowhere more clearly than in the invasion of Iraq. Now, 8 years later, under a Democratic Democratic administration, the myth that's being put forward is that Bush trod over opposition domestically, especially from the Democrats, to launch this administration, which people had warned him against again and again and again. In fact, if you go back and look at the record, what stands out is that there was not a single leader of the Democratic Party who argued against the invasion, per se. There were warnings given from Democrats, but those warnings were actually much the same as the warnings coming from the Republican leadership at the same time. And those were simply, if you're going to do this, make sure you do it right. This is true of Clinton. This is true of Madeleine Albright. This is true of Richard Holbrooke. And it was also true of the Republican elder statesmen who were saying the same thing, which is invasion is not either undesirable or wrong, but it must be carried out in a way that's prudent, in a way that's cognizant of the constraints. Not a single one of the Democratic leadership, in fact, said that the invasion is wrong or that it will lead to disaster. Now, the disagreement, to the extent that it existed, was simply this. Should the U.S. make use of the United Nations or should it not? There was not even a disagreement on how to relate to allies.
You've been listening to the first 8 minutes of Imperial Agenda, From Bush to Obama, a panel discussion featuring New York University Professor of Sociology, Vivek Chibber, Professor of Political Science at William Paterson University, Stephen Shalom, and Professor of Sociology at State University of New York at Stony Brook, Michael Schwartz. This program is available in full at the Vimeo Home for Videos at vimeo.com. Search on the keywords Imperial and PDX Justice, or you can link to this program via the PDX Justice Media Productions website at pdxjustice.org. This program was produced by PDX Justice Media Productions of Portland, Oregon. To find out more about our work and to access our growing library of free on-demand streaming video and audio programs, please visit our website at pdxjustice.org and write to us with your comments and questions at pdxjustice@riseup.net. Many of our programs are available on DVD or Blu-ray video disc. Please write to us for ordering information. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for supporting listener-sponsored radio, public access cable television, net neutrality, independent bookstores, and all forms of grassroots, democratic, community media.